What if I told you that a bright, young college student, full of dreams and promise, vanished into thin air one night, leaving behind nothing but questions and an unsettling mystery that haunts her family to this day? This isn't just a story about a disappearance. It's a story of a vibrant life, abruptly cut short, and a trail that leads us to one of the most mysterious and chilling unsolved cases in recent memory. This is the story of Adrienne Salinas. Adrienne Salinas was like any other 19-year-old with her whole life ahead of her. She lived in Tempe, Arizona, a bustling college town full of life and opportunity. She was attending a local community college, working hard to transfer to Arizona State University, where she dreamt of studying journalism. Her aspirations were bright, but her life was about much more than just academics. Adrienne had a close-knit circle of friends and a loving family that she deeply cherished. She was especially close to her father, Rick Salinas, who she would talk to every day. In fact, they had planned to spend Father's Day weekend together before her sudden disappearance turned their world upside down. Adrienne was described as vivacious, outgoing, and full of energy. She wasn't just a face in the crowd, she was someone who made her presence known, someone who had a contagious love for life. But everything changed on a warm June night in 2013. What started as a typical night out with friends quickly spiraled into a series of tragic events that no one saw coming. Adrienne's last known steps, her final phone calls, and the eerie silence that followed all point to a mystery that remains unsolved. How did a young woman, with her life in front of her, simply vanish without a trace? This isn't just about what happened, it's about understanding who Adrienne was, how her life was filled with potential, and how, in the blink of an eye, it was all taken away. June 14th, 2013, a night that should have been ordinary, full of fun and laughter, instead set the stage for a tragedy no one could have anticipated. Adrienne Salinas and her roommates were hosting a birthday party at their apartment in Tempe, Arizona. It was the start of a typical college weekend: loud music, friends filling the rooms, and drinks flowing well into the night. But as the celebration continued, beneath the surface, tensions began to simmer. Adrienne, who wasn't in a party mood that night, found herself at the center of a conflict that would soon unravel into something much darker. The root of the tension: her relationship with Francisco Artiga, her boyfriend. The two had been together for a while, but that night things were off. Adrienne noticed Francisco's attention drifting toward other women at the party, and this set off a chain reaction of emotions. Hurt and frustrated, Adrienne confronted him, and what began as a quiet tension soon erupted into an argument. Those present at the party recall heated words, discomfort growing in the air as the night pressed on. At around 2:30 in the morning, after hours of celebration turned sour, Adrienne and Francisco decided to leave the party. Perhaps they thought that stepping away from the crowd would help ease the tension. As they walked out together, nobody could have known that this would be one of the last times Adrienne would be seen alive. They drove through the quiet streets of Tempe, still arguing, the night feeling heavier with each passing moment. By the time Francisco dropped her off, what seemed like a minor argument had already shifted into something much more foreboding. This wasn't just an argument between young lovers. It was the start of a disappearance that would leave friends and family searching for answers they still haven't found. But as Adrienne stepped out of the car that night, the questions only began to multiply. What happened next? Why did she leave her apartment again? And how did a night of normal college life turn into a mystery that still haunts the streets of Tempe? The answers may lie in the details of that night, but for now, all we know is that June 14th marked the beginning of a terrifying unknown. After the heated argument with Francisco, Adrienne returned to her apartment just after 2:30 in the morning. The party was still going on, her roommates and friends were around, but something was different. Adrienne didn't stay. She briefly stepped inside, grabbed a few things, and then left again. It was as though the night had shifted into a frantic race. one that was about to take a dangerous turn. Adrienne decided to drive back to Francisco's apartment, but what exactly happened between her leaving her home and the early hours of the morning remains a fog of uncertainty. Somewhere on her way to Francisco's, Adrienne's car, a white Mercury Sable, was seen driving erratically. Witnesses would later report that her car cut off another driver and struck a median, leaving two of her tires blown out. The time was nearing 3:45 in the morning, and what might have been a minor accident turned into something far more concerning. Rather than waiting for help or calling someone, Adrienne chose to leave the damaged car on the side of the road. She wasn't far from her apartment, just a few blocks away. Her next move was an attempt to reconnect to fix something. Adrienne called a cab, intending to be picked up at a nearby gas station. She had three phone conversations with a driver confirming the location. But this is where her story takes a chilling turn. Adrienne never showed up at the gas station, and that cab ride she called for, it never happened. By 5 in the morning, her phone went silent. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if Adrienne had simply vanished from the streets of Tempe without a trace. From the moment she left her car, no one saw her again. There were no sightings, no security footage, no witness accounts, just the eerie quiet that followed. The last known contact, those calls with the cab driver, stand as the final piece of solid information before the mystery deepened. What could have happened between the time she abandoned her car and those final phone calls? Was someone watching, or did Adrienne meet with an accident on her way to the cab? What was intended to be a simple trip back to Francisco's apartment became the last chapter in Adrienne's known life, a moment frozen in time, leaving behind nothing but unsettling questions. From here, we're left asking, how does someone just disappear in the middle of a bustling city without a single clue? On June 16th, 2013, Rick Salinas was looking forward to spending Father's Day with his daughter Adrienne. It had been planned a weekend BBQ time together, the kind of simple joys that he cherished as a father. But as the morning passed with no word from Adrienne, unease crept in. He tried calling her over and over, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. The silence was deafening. As the hours stretched on, Rick's worry escalated. Adrienne wasn't the type to disappear without letting someone know where she was. She had always been responsible, someone who stayed in touch. His concern turned into panic when none of her friends had heard from her either. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Driven by instinct, Rick went to her apartment in Tempe. When he arrived, he noticed something unsettling. Adrienne's car, the white Mercury Sable with the blown out tires, was parked just a few blocks away from her home, abandoned on the side of the road. It wasn't like Adrienne to leave her car in such a state without calling for help. The sight of it confirmed what Rick feared the most: his daughter was missing. What followed was a frantic search. Rick, family, and friends began retracing Adrienne's steps, talking to anyone who might have seen or spoken to her. They canvassed the area, calling her name, looking for any sign, any clue that could lead them to her. Her roommates and her boyfriend Francisco were just as shocked as Rick. None of them had heard from her since the early hours of that morning. Temp police soon got involved. They started their own investigation, scouring Adrienne's apartment, questioning her friends, and following up on every lead they could. The initial theory was that she might have gotten into trouble after leaving the party or perhaps met with an accident. Yet nothing concrete turned up. The absence of clues, the disappearance of her presence, weighed heavily on everyone involved. The first day of searching yielded no answers, only more questions. Where could Adrienne have gone? How did she leave the scene without anyone noticing? The mystery deepened, but Rick Salinas remained hopeful that his daughter would be found. Yet, as the minutes turned into hours and the hours turned into days, that hope began to fade. What started as a typical Father's Day would become the beginning of an agonizing search for the truth, one that continues to this day. The disappearance was no longer just a personal tragedy, it was a community wide effort to find Adrienne. From the moment Adrienne was reported missing, Francisco Artiga, her boyfriend, became a focal point of the investigation. It's a natural path for investigators to take when a person disappears under mysterious circumstances. Those who know them best often come under scrutiny. And on the night of Adrienne's disappearance, Francisco was not just her boyfriend. He was also the last person to have seen her alive. Their relationship had its share of ups and downs, and the night of June 14th was no exception. The two had argued after Adrienne saw Francisco talking to another woman at the party they had both attended. By all accounts, the argument intensified as they drove away from the party, with Adrienne growing more upset. Francisco later told police that she had left his car at a stoplight, choosing to walk home rather than continue the conversation. This confrontation placed Francisco in the spotlight as a person of interest early in the investigation. The police did what they always do in cases like this. They followed the trail of the argument, questioning Francisco about every detail. Did the argument escalate into something more serious? Did Francisco know more than he was letting on? His involvement in the night's events, combined with the emotional turmoil of their argument, raised red flags. But Francisco was cooperative from the beginning. He answered the investigators' questions, provided a detailed account of that night, and even submitted to a lie detector test not just once, but multiple times. Over the course of the investigation, Francisco passed these polygraph tests, and despite the tensions between them that night, no evidence tied him to Adrienne's disappearance. There were no signs of foul play linking Francisco to anything more than a difficult moment between a couple. While the argument may have been heated, investigators couldn't find any direct connection between Francisco and what would ultimately happen to Adrienne. Their relationship, like many young romances, was complicated. It had its moments of passion, conflict, and reconciliation. But that night, those complexities led to suspicion. Even with Francisco ruled out, the emotional nature of their relationship continued to play into the narrative. Was their argument the trigger for Adrienne's mysterious disappearance, or was it just a coincidental moment in a much larger, darker story? As Francisco faded from the police's list of suspects, the focus shifted elsewhere. But for a time, his involvement stood at the center of the investigation. One more shadow cast over the night Adrienne Salinas disappeared. After leaving her damaged car behind in the early hours of June 15th, Adrienne was determined to find her way back to Francisco's apartment. She was frustrated, likely exhausted, but she had a plan. Around 4:53 in the morning, she made a phone call to a cab company, arranging for a ride to pick her up at a nearby convenience store. The location was close enough to walk, but Adrienne would never make it there. The cab driver, identified later as Tom Simon Jr., recalled speaking with Adrienne during those last moments. She was calm on the phone, directing him to meet her at the Ampum convenience store just a few blocks from her apartment. Over the course of their conversation, they confirmed the pickup location, and everything seemed routine. However, what happened next remains one of the most perplexing parts of the case. Adrienne never showed up at the convenience store. Tom Simon waited in the parking lot, expecting to see her walk through the doors, but she never appeared. Surveillance footage from the store was later reviewed by investigators, but there was no sign of Adrienne on the tapes, no fleeting glimpse of her walking toward the store, no indication that she had made it even close to the agreed location. This moment leaves a gaping hole in the timeline of Adrienne's final hours. Where did she go after leaving her car? How did she vanish in such a short distance without being seen by anyone? The fact that the surveillance cameras failed to capture any trace of her only deepened the mystery. It's as though she disappeared into thin air, her last steps erased from sight. Despite this, investigators found no evidence of foul play at the convenience store. The cab driver was questioned thoroughly, but he was never named as a suspect. He simply waited. unaware that he was one of the last people to have spoken to Adrienne. The gap between her calling for the cab and her failure to arrive leaves unanswered questions that would haunt the investigation for years to come. Was someone else involved in those missing minutes? Did Adrian encounter a stranger, or did something happen along the way that remains hidden from the public eye? These questions linger, gnawing at the heart of the investigation, as the timeline of Adrian's last known movements remains incomplete. On August 6, 2013, hikers exploring the vast and desolate terrain near Apache Junction stumbled upon something that would send shockwaves through the community: human remains partially buried in a desert wash. The location, a rugged, isolated area some 30 miles from Tempe, was unforgiving. The harsh desert sun and monsoon floods had taken their toll, leaving the remains in an advanced state of decomposition. It would take days before forensic testing confirmed what everyone feared: it was Adrienne Salinas. The discovery brought some closure to the search for Adrienne, but it left far more questions than answers. Due to the condition of her body, investigators were unable to determine a precise cause of death. The remains had been exposed to the elements for weeks, likely scattered by both the intense summer heat and seasonal flooding in the desert. It was clear that Adrienne had been moved. She hadn't simply wandered into the desert herself. But how and by whom remained a haunting mystery. What struck investigators was the remote nature of the location. How did Adrienne's remains end up so far from where she was last seen in Tempe? The 30-mile distance between her last known whereabouts and the place where her remains were found suggested foul play, but no evidence pointed directly to a specific suspect. The desert wash, isolated and difficult to access, was not a place someone would stumble upon by accident. Whoever left Adrienne there did so intentionally, further clouding the mystery. Adding to the complexity, authorities couldn't pinpoint a time of death or establish how Adrienne died. There were no obvious signs of trauma on the remains that could definitively indicate foul play. Investigators could only speculate whether she had been killed and left in the desert or if something else, more accidental, had occurred. The fact that parts of her body were missing, though not officially confirmed by authorities, further fueled speculation. Yet, with no concrete evidence, the case grew colder. For Adrienne's father, Rick Salinas, the discovery of her remains was both a devastating end to the search and the beginning of a new, agonizing chapter. He now knew where his daughter was, but the how and why remained unanswered. The haunting reality of finding Adrienne in such an isolated, rugged area left the police and her family desperate for answers that continued to elude them. The discovery of Adrienne Salinas' body was not the closure her family had hoped for. It was the opening of yet another door to an unsolved tragedy. The remote location, the missing pieces of her remains, and the inability to determine a cause of death all contributed to one lingering question. Who was responsible for Adrienne's final journey to the desert, and why have they never been found? With no solid evidence, no clear cause of death, and the desert as the final resting place, investigators were left with a single haunting question: who took Adrienne Salinas' life and why? Over the years, several suspects have emerged, but none have been definitively linked to the case. One of the most intriguing suspects in Adrienne's case was Tom Simon Jr., the cab driver she had called in the early hours of June 15th. He was the last person to have contact with her, yet she never made it to their arranged meeting spot at the convenience store. Though he cooperated with the investigation, there were several unsettling details about his past that cast a shadow of suspicion over him. Tom's odd behavior didn't go unnoticed. In one disturbing incident, he allegedly pulled a hacksaw from the trunk of his car during a ride with a female passenger, leaving her terrified. Although this encounter didn't directly tie him to Adrienne's case, it raised serious questions about his character. Could someone capable of such bizarre actions have been involved in something darker? Despite these concerns, no physical evidence ever linked Tom to Adrienne's disappearance. Investigators did their due diligence. Tom was questioned extensively and his cab was examined. Yet, without any definitive proof, the trail went cold. His whereabouts at the time of Adrienne's disappearance were corroborated, and with no DNA or forensic evidence to tie him to the scene, the police had no choice but to move on from Tom as a primary suspect. Still, his presence in those final hours remains one of the most unsettling aspects of this case. Another person who came under scrutiny was Brian Patrick Miller, a known serial killer who lived in the same area where Adrienne's remains were found. Miller was infamous for the canal murders in Phoenix during the early 1990s, where two young women were brutally killed. He had a pattern of attacking young women, which naturally led to him being considered in Adrienne's case. Miller worked in the area near where Adrienne's remains were discovered, which only deepened suspicions. He was known to have frequented the same neighborhoods, and his violent history of targeting women added a chilling layer to the investigation. However, once again, no direct evidence connected him to Adrienne. The police explored this lead thoroughly, but without DNA or physical proof linking Miller to her death, he too was ruled out. Over the years, many theories have swirled around Adrienne's disappearance. Some believe she was abducted after leaving her car, possibly by someone who offered her a ride. Others speculate that she might have met with an accident, wandering into the desert after a night of emotional distress, though the location of her body 30 miles away in a remote wash makes this seem unlikely. One prevailing theory is that Adrienne was the victim of foul play by someone who knew the area well. The desert, with its vast, uninhabited stretches, is a perfect place to hide a body, especially during the hot summer months when few people venture into its depths. But who could have orchestrated such a crime without leaving a trace? Some online sleuths have pointed out the possibility of a stranger encounter gone wrong, an opportunistic predator who saw Adrienne in a vulnerable state and took advantage of the situation. The lack of clues at the scene, combined with the state of decomposition when her body was found, has made it nearly impossible to verify any theory with certainty. Despite these suspicions, neither Tom Simon Jr., Brian Patrick Miller, nor anyone else has been definitively linked to Adrienne's death. Investigators continue to search for answers, but the passage of time has only made it more difficult to uncover new evidence. The theories remain just that, speculations without the hard facts needed to bring closure to Adrienne's family. With each suspect explored and every lead followed, the question still remains. What happened to Adrienne Salinas in those final, mysterious hours, and who was responsible for her tragic end? When a young woman's body is found 30 miles from where she vanished, the questions multiply, and so do the speculations. How did Adrienne Salinas end up in the vast desert, and what really happened to her that fateful night? The discovery of Adrienne's remains in the desert wash near Apache Junction only deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance. The distance between where she was last seen and the place where her body was found leaves many wondering, was she transported there by someone, or did something happen that caused her to end up in such a remote location? This gap of 30 miles is crucial in understanding the possibilities surrounding her death. From the beginning, investigators have grappled with the idea that foul play may have been involved. The location where Adrienne's remains were found is not a place someone would end up by accident. It's desolate, difficult to access, and far removed from the busy streets of Tempe. If Adrienne was taken there by someone, it raises the unsettling question: who could have done it and why? The police were never able to establish a clear cause of death due to the advanced state of decomposition, but the remoteness of the site strongly suggests that someone knew the area and chose it deliberately. Adding to the mystery, there have been unconfirmed reports that parts of Adrienne's body were missing, specifically her head and hands. These details have circulated in some reports, fueling speculation that whoever was responsible may have attempted to conceal the true cause of death or delay identification. However, law enforcement has not fully confirmed these details, leaving the public to speculate about the condition of her remains and what that could mean. While foul play is a strong possibility, some have speculated that Adrienne may have met with an accident. Perhaps in her emotional state after the argument with Francisco and the car crash, she wandered off into the desert and became disoriented. The desert can be unforgiving, especially during the summer with extreme heat and dangerous terrain. Could Adrienne have wandered too far, gotten lost, and succumbed to the elements? This theory, while possible, does not explain how she ended up so far from where her car was abandoned. The accident theory also fails to account for the fact that she had called a cab and seemed to have a clear plan to get back to Francisco's apartment. It's hard to imagine Adrienne in such a state of distress, walking into the desert on her own when she was actively trying to get a ride. This raises another layer of speculation. Did she encounter someone who offered her help, only for things to take a dark turn? The location of Adrienne's body is one of the most baffling aspects of this case. Why was her body found so far from the city, in a place that would take time and effort to reach? The Apache Junction area, while scenic, is remote and not a place where people typically go without a reason. Some believe the person responsible for Adrienne's death was familiar with the area and knew it would serve as a good place to hide a body. Others wonder if Adrienne was taken there against her will, possibly in the hours after she disappeared from Tempe. The biggest question remains: who was responsible? The suspects that have emerged over the years, Francisco Artiga, the cab driver Tom Simon Jr., and even serial killer Brian Patrick Miller, have all been ruled out due to a lack of direct evidence. No DNA, no surveillance footage, no eyewitnesses, just a body found in a desolate place with no clear answers. The case remains open, but the passing years have done little to bring new information to light. In the absence of solid facts, the public is left to speculate. Was Adrienne the victim of an opportunistic predator? Did someone close to her know more than they let on? Or was this a tragic accident that spiraled out of control, leading her far into the desert? These theories keep the case alive in the minds of those still searching for answers, but without new evidence, Adrienne's disappearance and death remain one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in Arizona. For the Salinas family, the search for answers is far from over. Years have passed, but the pain of losing Adrienne still cuts as deeply as the day she disappeared. And for Rick Salinas, the agony of not knowing what happened to his daughter remains an open wound. Rick Salinas was more than just Adrienne's father. He was her confidant, her protector, the one who always knew where she was. The bond between them was strong, and her disappearance shattered his world. Since that fateful Father's Day in 2013, when Rick realized his daughter was missing, his life has become an endless search for the truth. Every day that passes without answers is a day filled with torment. As a father, not knowing what happened to his daughter is an unimaginable weight that he continues to carry. Over the years, Rick has worked tirelessly to keep Adrienne's case in the public eye. He has given countless interviews, organized search efforts, and pursued every possible lead, hoping that someone somewhere will come forward with the crucial information that could finally bring justice to his daughter's case. But with each passing year, the answers seem to drift further away, and the emotional toll on the Salinas family grows heavier. The police too have continued their investigation, though progress has been slow. Despite the lack of physical evidence, they have not given up on solving Adrienne's case. The FBI has even offered a reward of $20,000 for information that could lead to a breakthrough. Detectives still believe that someone out there knows something. It might be a small detail, an overlooked observation, or a piece of information that didn't seem important at the time. But any of these could be the key to solving the case. In their search for answers, authorities have also turned to the public for help. The media coverage, the rewards offered, and the tireless efforts of law enforcement are all part of an ongoing effort to ensure that Adrienne's story isn't forgotten. They continue to ask anyone who might know anything, no matter how small it seems, to come forward. Even the slightest piece of information could unlock the mystery of what happened to Adrian that night. If you were there, if you saw something, or if you heard anything, now is the time to speak up. The plea continues from both the police and Adrian's family. As the case grows colder, the need for answers becomes more urgent. Adrian's loved ones deserve closure, and the person responsible for her death must be held accountable. For Rick Salinas, there will be no peace until he knows what happened to his daughter. Until then, he keeps searching, keeps hoping, and keeps asking the question that haunts him every day. Why Adrienne, and who took her from this world? The case of Adrienne Salinas remains open, a tragic mystery waiting to be solved.